Welcome to the School of Laughs podcast, brought to you by schooloflaughs.com. Whether you're an aspiring comedian, a part-time pro, or a speaker who wants to become funnier, this is the podcast for you. We'll break down tools, tips, and techniques to help you get bigger, better, and more bookable. And now, here's the show.
Welcome to the episode. This is Rick Roberts, and today we're going to have a fun flashback encore presentation of episode 2 of the School of Laughs, 12 comedy tips you can't afford to ignore. And if you've never gone back and listened to the early episodes, or you haven't dug that deep, or your player doesn't play them, you can always, matter of fact, go to schooloflaughs.com and check out podcasts and search any topic and get all the way back to the first. But if you haven't gone back that far, or even if you did from the beginning, this is worth revisiting. It's 12 questions posed to me from people that were taking a comedy class at the time. Gavin Miller is on the mic as well. You recognize his voice if you've been with us from the very beginning. And we tackle things like, what questions should you ask yourself behind every joke you write? How can you float your jokes out there to see if they're funny when you're not even on stage? How can you use other characters to set up or deliver punchlines in your material? Shortcuts to finding your voice. Why putting yourself in the joke can open up more opportunities. Picking material to perform in a competition. 6 keys to making your material connect with an audience. Show me the money. What are the average paychecks for club comics? Offstage moves that help you get behind the mic. The dangers of overstepping boundaries with bookers. 2 kinds of club headliners. And why you shouldn't let other people's goals define your success. To me, that sounds like 12 different podcast episodes. But we're going to put them all on this one right now. And I would like to thank our Patreon sponsor for this episode, all the way down in Australia. It's Josh Liston. If you'd like to sponsor the podcast through a one-time or recurring donation, you can do that at schooloflaughs.com/Patreon. Thanks, Josh. Let's kick it off and do this retro flashback encore presentation of episode 2.
Well, one thing before you're starting, if you're thinking about comedy, how do you do a self-check and know whether you're funny or not?
Okay, I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
You definitely already think you are if you're even considering it.
Sure.
Like if you're dry as a bone and you've never got this probably wouldn't even appeal to you in the first place.
Right.
It's the craziest thing to possibly make a living at anything. So I think you honestly just have to ask yourself, do other people think I'm funny? Because everybody thinks they're the funniest person around.
Right.
We don't know why other people don't get it, but we think we're the funniest person.
Right. And I guess with that comes, you're the person at a party or with your friends, and you're making them laugh, and you're like, wow, maybe I'm funny here.
Right.
Could I do this? There's a difference though. There's a difference in stand-up and stand-up writing and comedy writing that's different than being funny at a party or funny with your friends.
Right. Yeah, I think people naturally find out first if they are more inclined to perform than they are to write.
Okay.
So when you're at the party or you're at work and you're busting people up and you're the person they kind of gravitate around, they look forward to seeing, more people come to you than walk away from you.
Right. Then
you've got that second level of comedy, the performing thing, kind of a little more natural.
Right. Okay.
But you may not know how to write those off-the-cuff comments down in a comedy form for people who don't know you.
Right.
So that's where you'll have to kind of dial it in, figure out how to write jokes a little bit better, and be consistent around strangers. I mean, that's all comedy is being funny around people who don't know you.
Right.
Being likable is being funny around people who do already know you.
Sure. So if you're doing well at the grocery store checkout line, that kind of thing, when people don't know you.
Ideally, you have the job at the checkout line where you have about 180 people to try jokes on all day long.
Sure.
I mean, as they come through, you get stronger and work. I mean, that really is a great job for you if you.
I mean, that's comedy writing development. Like, you're developing the material as you go there. So let's say, you think you have some funny ideas and that kind of thing. How do you develop that into, you see these 3 or 4 minute sets that people do, on Letterman and stuff like that. And they're so tight and there's joke, and they're so good. How do you develop your funny thought, that you had at the grocery checkout line into a stand-up joke?
Yeah.
Something that's going to work.
Yeah, it'll take a lot of trial and error, but a few things you can do, whatever phrase it is in your mind that got the laugh,
Right.
or if you've actually said it before and it got a laugh. First, I'd say, what am I trying to say? This is what I always say to myself when I write a joke. What am I trying to say? In one sentence, what is this joke trying to convey to people who don't know me about whatever topic I'm talking about?
Okay, and that's not necessarily a funny sentence.
Doesn't have
That's
to
just
be.
the idea of behind it.
Right. You have to know clearly what you're trying to say so that you can write the joke to help that thought come out.
Okay.
All right. So, trying to give you just an example.
So,
Okay, I'll give you an example.
Okay.
All right. So a few years ago, gas got really high.
Sure.
After years of being fairly okay. Boom. Everybody's talking about gas prices. Comics have different jokes about gas. I'm trying to think of how can I approach this from a different angle.
Right.
Well, when gas prices were low, Bill Clinton was the president. I mean, when he was there, you could still get it under $1.
Sure.
Right? So my mind went, okay, that's the way it used to be. Now it's high. Apparently, to get gas prices low, the president has to make a few mistakes, and he wants to make us happy by dropping the gas down.
Sure.
So, okay, so that's what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say if we have a bad president who is about ready to be impeached, our gas prices will be okay.
Right. Which
So
is
I
just
kinda-
the reality part of the idea.
Yeah, it's
That's
just the reality, just the logic. It's the twisted logic slightly of
Right.
how a comedian would make it make sense. So now I have to figure out how do I get that point across to strangers. I'm going to step on stage. I can't just say the president messed up, gas prices are low. I have to invert
Crickets.
right,
Yeah.
and address the gas, and then have the old president, President Clinton, being the solution to the problem.
Right.
So I slowly got it formed as, man, gas prices are so high, I kind of miss Bill Clinton. Okay, so now I've got an interesting statement. The crowd, half of them liked Bill Clinton, half of them didn't, probably.
Right, sure.
So it's an engaging comment. Whenever he messed up, gas prices got down to 89 cents a gallon on the weekend.
Right.
And then that's where the laugh would be. And then I could tag it, write some extra punchlines based on that statement and that punchline.
Sure.
But I couldn't just come out and say, this president we got is so good, gas prices are high. It wouldn't make sense. I have to give them the logic for the joke.
Okay.
So that one took a couple of weeks of twisting around, but I asked myself, what am I trying to say? Now, how do I say it?
Sure. And I guess, when you're having those thoughts, like how do you know? Because a lot of the first timers, the beginners, they're by themselves when they're trying to come up with these thoughts, or these comedic ideas. How do you know whether something's going to be funny? And I know that's a weird question because you sometimes can't know maybe until you're in front of an audience.
Right.
But what are you looking for in that material? You're looking for like the twist at the end, or the sort of like, what are some of those tools? I think we've talked about juxtaposition in the class and some things like that.
Yeah, misdirection is really the key to all of it. You really have to say something they're not expecting to hear.
Okay.
In a way that makes sense, and they wish they would have thought of it.
Right.
To me, all great jokes fall into that exact statement. I hear it, I'm like, oh, that is so good. It makes total sense. Why couldn't I have figured that out?
Right.
That's when I know a comedian, at least for me, is somebody that I admire.
Sure.
And I respect their material. So how do you know those things are funny when you don't have an audience, or you haven't got on stage, or you're afraid to go to an open mic?
Sure.
You got to float it out there. You float it out to the guy at the gas station. You float it out to somebody at work. As you're ordering food at Burger King. Well, I don't care where it is. You got to get some kind of feedback on it.
Yeah.
Usually you have a buddy you can bounce stuff off of. But
Sometimes the friends, though, not the best people, because they either are too harsh on you,
or they like you too much.
Yeah, or they like
way.
you too much. So,
But I would start there and just kind of float it. Now, the great thing about today, you could put that thought into a tweet or a post, and you could kind of rationalize how many responses you think a good statement would get. I mean, you could look at any statement you made on Facebook.
Right.
Take out baby pictures or announcements of a new child, because those every friend will like that.
Sure.
But anything you've put off the cuff that you thought was kind of funny, and say, okay, there's my benchmark, 36 people like that, or whatever, out of 50 friends. Or
And you just unfriend the rest.
yeah, you start unfriending people that don't like you,
Yeah.
and then pretty soon you've got
Done.
just
You've got
yourself.
a good audience. That's what you've got.
You got you and your other Facebook profile that likes your
Yeah.
jokes. But
Yeah.
no, you can float it out there, and some people will actually like it, and then they'll write a comment. And if they're not a comedian and you're aspiring to be a comedian, that comment they write could be a tag for your joke.
Sure.
And,
Sure.
if you like it enough, you might ask them, hey, I'm going to use this in my show. Can I use
Right.
that, Ryan? Now, I wouldn't do that all the time, but early on, a tweet is a great way to write it because you have to condense the thought into 140 characters.
Yeah.
A Facebook post a little bit longer, but either of those, if people read the whole thing, it's probably short enough.
Yeah.
So
I mean, when I sit down, I feel like a poser because sometimes when I sit down to Facebook or something, I feel like I'm about to write the next great American novel. Like this thought has to be so perfect,
right?
To see if I can get a response and all that. Sometimes it works, but it is good practice in just editing as someone who's going to read it, the timing, those kind of things.
When you type it out, it's going to look different than it sounds in your head.
And sounds in their head. They've got to read it. That's a big part of communication.
For me, that's a big part too, is just getting it so I can I can't really edit in my mind as much as I can visually.
Right.
I see all the words. I see there's too many words.
So is that how you do? You have to type everything out and be able to
sometimes
see every word kind of thing?
For me, there's no one thing that I do every single time. There's a handful of things that come in cycles.
Okay.
I mean, sometimes honestly, for me, if I'm driving to a gig and it's a few hours away.
Right.
I love that time. I used to hate it, but now it's the only time I have having a family and stuff.
Driving 85 miles an hour to Arkansas somewhere.
Yeah, it's funny, but now you can actually get deep into a thought.
Right.
You can say it out loud. You can kind of record it on your iPhone or whatever and come back to it later. But nobody can interrupt me unless I want them to for that 3 hours. I can turn my phone off and be a comedian and be a writer. And then later on, I might type it up to a post or whatever.
Sure.
Or bounce it off a buddy of mine. What I tend to do is I'll get an idea, and maybe it's just a one-liner, and I'll wait till I have 2 or 3 lines that come around that same kind of topic, and then I'll build a joke out of that.
So you can do that. Okay.
I'm less likely to come out on stage and throw out a one-liner that doesn't even have a tag or anything. It's just one sentence that gets a laugh, and then have to jump into a brand new topic.
Yeah. Now, have you had things that, maybe an example or something that you've had to work on, there's some bit or something that you'd thought would work but wasn't funny yet, that you're just working on for
all the time.
All of a sudden.
All the time. But I'll give you an example recently that I intuitively should have known what to do earlier.
Sure.
But my emphasis was on the wrong place in the situation.
Right.
All right. So I'm a dad. I got 2 kids. My first was a son. And when he was a baby, I would hear 2 things. He's so cute. Or they'd say, he looks just like you.
Right.
So I was trying to write a joke where I must be great looking because everybody looks at my baby says, he's cute and I look just like him.
Sure.
It was never funny to a crowd. I couldn't find a way to make that funny.
Right.
The way I found to make it funny is to have him realize that he looks like me.
Gotcha.
And I ask him what he thinks about that. And he goes, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
So it was making fun. It was self-deprecating joke. It made fun of me. I got to use his voice. So it was a different character on stage.
Right.
He was the setup guy. He was the straight man, and I was the funny. He set me up.
Right.
All these great things happened, but it didn't happen when I was like, I must be a cute-looking guy because I think my kid looks just like me. And he's cute.
Sure.
So it was logic transfer, but I flipped it around to make myself the butt of the joke instead of the better part of the joke.
And that comes into the technique of writing. There's so many little devices and little techniques that you don't figure out till later sometimes, or you stumble onto them. I was kind of, as I'm writing and stuff, and I'm just starting, so it's been very little, but it seems to be in exaggeration, that kind of thing. Something happens to me and then here's my big thought on it,
Right.
And so, but I'm struggling to use other tools in that. Is there a good way to practice that, or what's the best way to practice some tools you've never used before?
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, one thing at least now is that you're using the same device a lot.
Okay.
And so that if you notice it, the crowd will probably either notice it or catch on to it, or not be surprised by the 5th joke that has the same kind of approach.
Right.
So that's a good step. As a beginning comic, you've already felt that pace, and I've got to change things up a little bit.
Sure.
So you kind of move the focus of the jokes around a little bit. I mean, right now you're in the exaggeration. I'm going to say something so outlandish they'll have to
laugh.
And that's pretty normal for most beginning comics. Subtlety takes a while to be confident to deliver.
Right.
So that might be the next place you go with it. Okay, I'm hitting over the head super hard with big visual things
every time, and they're
crazy
wearing them out maybe.
Yeah, I'm going to dial it back on a couple of jokes.
Okay.
And so just whatever your topics are that you're thinking about, find a slightly less obvious or slightly less over the top angle on it. Pull back. I mean, there's a few different things you can always do is put yourself in the joke.
Okay.
Make yourself unaware that's going on around you. And so you're lost in a situation that everybody else can deal with and you can't.
Right.
Think of what I try to do is think of all the great situational comedy techniques they use in all the legendary sitcoms. You know,
a huge one would be like they used to use, I think, all the time. If I'm getting you right, it was like the birth of a baby. Like the dad's always in there. He has no idea what's going on.
Clueless dad.
He's the
fish out of water.
Yeah. And the doctor, the wife, so everybody seems to know exactly what's going on except for this guy.
Right.
So that would be, you could place yourself as that person, and then from that point of view, my wife knew what was going on, the doctor knew what was going on. I don't know if they had talked beforehand, like, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And by moving yourself around, you're consistent because you're who you are on stage, but you're keeping the audience guessing at what the punchline and where it's coming from.
Right.
All right. Still coming from you, but it's coming from a different part of you. We're very complex people.
Sure.
Any emotion you have, which is how many? There's dozens, right?
Yeah.
Different levels of each emotion. So
sure.
Coming into each joke, the setup, how you feel about it and how you deliver it pushes it in a different place. How you react to people.
And I think that goes to the next thing, because I'm 35. I don't have that much more time left on this planet.
More than I do.
But my thought is I need to create a sort of like a point of view that's just mine. And so as I'm writing these things and I'm trying to put myself in that position, like how do you find out who you are? Like, you know, I have jokes that are about, like, you know, airplane food. I don't want to do those. Right. Because that's not me, but I find it funny, but then I'm like, but I don't really, that doesn't work in my set or doesn't work as me. Like, how help me find me? Yeah,
it takes a while. And we talked earlier during the class about 7 years of getting on stage 5 to 10 times a week is kind of a magic number. It's a frightening number.
Sure.
But I mean, there's a few things you can do early on to kind of try to find that quickly. One is ask your friends or people who know you really well, you know, what do you guys say I'm like when I'm not around here? Like when I leave the room, what do you, that's that, man, Gavin's a dark dude. Right. You know, or Gavin's man, he doesn't know what's going on. He's they know. They'll never tell you unless you ask. Yeah. I asked. I did ask. And my sister and my father, who both know me very well, obviously, they told me, they said, well, when you get really ramped up, like when you start ranting about some subject or something that's gone wrong or something, that's when we all start laughing, and then that gives you even more juice and you just skyrocket, you know? And I was like, oh, well, is that me? And then how do I write for that? Okay, well, that's good information. So I would go back and ask them, why do you think it's funny that I would rant? Right. And find that juxtaposition that sets you off on that tangent. I mean, everybody can be mad about something and rant, but they find it funny from you for a certain reason. So I would go back and ask him, why wouldn't I? Or, you know, why do you think that's strange for me to do that? Yeah. And that might get you closer to the answer to your question. Okay. And who am I? Yeah. And family's going to be a little more gentle, probably. It sounds like, I don't know. Sisters can be pretty brutal, I guess, but they are awful. I just suggest against them. Just give them away. If you have daughters, just, I don't know, sell them to foreign countries or something. But you know, that export-import's out of balance anyway. We're bringing them all in. We're not sending enough American kids out. Yeah, I know about a dozen I could get off the street right now. Done right now. Yeah, absolutely. I guess. You know, you hear sort of hack jokes about, you know, airplane comedy, that kind of thing. Are there dead topics to write? Like, as you're starting to write things and you're like, oh my gosh, I've got the funniest joke about my experience on the airplane. You know, are there topics like that to kind of stay away from as you're starting to write? You know, well, ideally, you would write about stuff that nobody's talked about. But when you do that, you're not going to have a connection with the majority of the crowd because it's stuff that nobody's talking about. Sure. So it is you experiencing the airplane ride differently than anybody else. Right. George Carlin did a huge airplane bit. Dennis Miller. Almost every comic who's ridden on an airplane will notice different things. Right. So you have to ask yourself, what's my spin on it? Has that spin been done? If it hasn't, then it's up for grabs. Now, here's the tricky part. When you start going out and you're doing nights where you're trying to get work or you're trying to get into a festival or a TV thing where there's a bunch of different comics. Sure. those aren't the jokes you're going to want to do in that situation.
Right.
Because chances are 3 or 4 other comics
They just did.
left them in their set.
Yeah.
And so here's the 4th guy, and you're in the green room. You don't even hear the other comic set, and you come out and you do your airplane joke or something.
Right.
And somebody 3 minutes
Oh,
ago
really?
did it.
You don't like the airplane food too?
Right.
Like,
you know what I mean? So you have to realize that,
They don't even give food on airplanes anymore. They give you peanuts. And,
yeah, 6 of them if
Yeah.
you count them. So what material do I have that's the most unique for that particular situation, for when you're with a bunch of comics,
Right.
you're doing the top of their stuff? What's my most unique comedy there is very important.
Okay.
And your most common topics, you want to put those to the side. All those comics are going to have some common topics.
Right.
I mean, like I said, all the big names, you just have to find your spin. Now, I will say this. Where do you find topics that nobody's talking about? I think, and here's
What's
here's,
the-
here's where
I'm like waiting
here's
for
where
the
my
secret.
next 20 minutes
Yeah.
maybe. It's all science and technology applied to science, and the stuff, the 3D printers that they're coming out with now, stuff like that is mind blowing. And nobody before they invented these things had any jokes about them.
Right.
So at least you have a chance for a while to be one of the first or early comics, be an early adopter of topics as much as people adopt technology early.
Right.
And you have some leeway and you get a head start.
Yeah.
And if you're always listening and reading the different articles and magazines and watching the stuff on the internet about this new technology, you're always going to be a little bit ahead of somebody else.
Sure.
Because all that new stuff can be applied to old situations.
Right.
Drones, right?
Yeah.
Just think back. I mean, I'm 45. If there were drones and motion sensor video cameras in the high school halls when I was in high school,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be here right now. I'd
You'd be
still be
gone.
locked up somewhere,
Taken
right?
out.
So that would be my spin. That would be an angle I could write 5 or 10
Sure.
jokes about, and just
Sure.
think about different situations that I got away with and how that technology would change.
Had they seen what I was doing behind Portable B,
Right. Your
I
entire,
would not be here.
That's right. Your entire life is worth talking about.
Sure.
So that's the other thing too. Write about your own experiences more than common experiences of other people.
Right.
More unique things that have happened to you.
Just the personal, using the personal aspect to connect with other people, even if they haven't necessarily had that exact experience.
They may have never had the experience, but they've had the emotion that you've had during that experience.
Okay. So maybe focus on the emotion
Yeah.
and the connectability of the, I don't know if connectability is a word.
I'll play it in Scrabble. See what happens.
But using that as a focus for the material.
Yeah, you have to have
connect.
some kind of connection with the crowd. As
Okay.
crazy as you want to get or whatever, there has to be some kind of connection with them. So
Would that be one of the paramount things is to sort of be funny and connect?
I think here's the if you could twist this Rubik's Cube
Give it.
and give
Yeah.
you all 6
Give it
sides, you
now.
keep track of the sides, but authentic, fresh, unique, taking the joke deeper than a comic would settle for.
Right.
I mean, you could write a joke, write 10 punchlines, and ditch the first 6
Sure.
and start with the last
Sure.
3, and you're already in a better spot. Relatable is not a word, but relative to you have to find that connection where you relate with the crowd on
Right.
some level.
Yeah.
Empathy from the crowd for your situation, or you want them to cheer for your success in that situation. Those are all, you twist that around any time in any joke, it's going to work for you.
Sure.
If you do a joke with none of that, you still have a chance at a laugh,
Right.
but it just decreases.
Yeah.
5 or
You'd
6
have to be
times.
so clever, and that's probably
Right. If
not
you have
the
a joke
case.
with all of those, it's a home run. It's your closer.
Yeah. Who? I mean, maybe Bill Cosby and those kind of guys connecting. That's their bread and butter, is they connect with the average experience.
Timeless average experiences.
Yeah.
Having a brother or a sister is timeless.
Done.
Parents, timeless. Being a parent, all the levels he's taken it to throughout his career, it's all timeless.
Yeah.
So that's not everybody's goal, but I mean, you can see how he's so successful.
Yeah. And I guess that's a good transition into the next thing as goals is money.
Yeah.
Where, and this may sound like a strange question, so I can explain it a little. Where does the money come from in comedy? People think it's from being funny, but it's really from the consumers of comedy. The people who are coming through the front door, the ticket sales. Is that,
It works a few different ways.
Okay.
And we'll probably get emails and saying it doesn't work that way for me, because there's so many different ways.
Okay.
For a beginning comic, you won't get any money for a while.
Right.
Let me say this first. Would you buy a book? Would you pay for a full price for a book that only had 1 chapter written and it was kind of not quite done?
Good point.
All right. So when you've got your set together, your book together, when you've got a full thing to sell,
Sure.
then people are willing to pay full price if it's a good product.
Yeah.
You could have 10 comedy sets written,
Yeah.
and they're complete, but nobody's buying it.
Right.
All right. So you have to connect so they're interested in it. Eventually, you'll get to work at a comedy club, and you do that through appearing at their open mics if they have them, doing showcases during the regular week
Right.
is the next step up typically, and then they see you can be funny in front of a paying crowd. They'll trust you with emceeing at some point at that club. And when you MC, they might start you out and say just 10 minutes until they see you can handle that. Then they'll give you 12.
And
50.
you ask the question, how much am I going to make? And they laugh, and then...
You don't even ask.
Yeah, don't
At
ask.
the end of the week, you just kind of hang out, and eventually
That's
somebody's...
a good tip. Don't ask.
I mean, you'll ask other comics that have been there.
Yeah.
What'd you get? And they may or may not tell you, but most of them say, I think they pay like, $300 for the MC for the week.
Right, okay.
So at least you know what ballpark you're in. But definitely you want to ask your buddies that have worked
is
there.
that...
So
I think sometimes that's the numbers that no one talks about.
yeah, so I'll give you just rough. I mean, and each club is different based on how many nights they're open,
Right.
how big the seating, all that stuff. But between probably $250 and $375, $400
Okay.
to MC a week at a club. Most clubs will fall
Thank
in
you.
that
I'll take
range
that
somewhere.
job.
Right? So for the average person
Yeah.
who's working 40 hours or
Sure.
whatever, they think, well, I can just work a few nights. That's not bad. But there's a lot of time that went into getting those few nights.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's working one club. All right, there's 52 weeks on the calendar. I can't quit my job yet.
Right.
So I can work the local club, and I can maybe find a weekend room that's a couple hours drive that I can make after work on Friday.
Okay.
So that's typically the next step for a lot of comics. So they'll get in that weekend room, they'll MC that. A lot of times a weekend room, and by that I'm saying a place
yeah, I
that's
was
a
gonna say,
restaurant
okay.
that closes down at 6 and turns all the tables and stuff around, and now they've got a comedy.
Now they got it right.
Right. So they maybe did lunch business in that room, but now they're not. So people buy dinner and they watch the comedy show or whatever. So a lot of those shows, it's maybe just two comics. So when you host that show or you're the opener of that show, you're doing 20 or 30 minutes instead of 10 or 15.
Right. Sure.
And the headliner, the only other comic on the bill, usually is doing an hour
Right.
plus.
Okay.
So those sometimes pay better for 2 nights than the
Just
comedy
because you're
club stuff.
splitting it between two, or...
Because you're splitting it between two. You'd probably do 2 shows Friday, 2 shows Saturday.
Okay.
And so you're doing 4 shows in a shorter amount of time, but you're doing longer time. So you're a little bit further down the road than just
Right.
the club MC.
Okay.
But it's weird. A club MC should be a better comic than a one-nighter or a weekend room opener.
Right. Okay.
Sometimes people only work those weekend rooms and can't get into a real comedy club because they don't have an A act for an A room.
Sure.
They've got a B act for a B room. And
Right.
it's a good fit there, but they haven't.
But it's not...
They
yeah.
haven't thought that an intelligent paying customer base isn't going to listen to the same stupid jokes that a
Over
bunch of
and
drunks
over.
at a one-nighter at a pool hall would.
Right,
All right.
right,
So,
right.
so that's the next step. So you might pick up, $200 to $300 just for those couple shows.
Okay.
You might make as much as $400. It just depends, once
Sure.
again, how many tickets they're selling. In this early stage, you never get anything. There's no variety. What you get paid is what you get paid.
Right.
There's no deal where you get money depending on how many tickets are sold.
Right.
Which is a good thing for you because as a beginner, you've never been to this town. You're not selling tickets with
No
your name anyway.
responsibility.
No
You
responsibility.
just show up and be sort of funny.
Right. Be as funny as you can. So you do that for a while, then all of a sudden you're hopefully still writing good material at those
Yeah.
B rooms. Still A material, but you're doing it at the B room.
Hopefully.
If this makes sense.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, stop me. But then when you come back, you're used to doing 30 minutes. Now you're only going to do 15 at the comedy club.
Right.
You're doing your best 15 out
You
of
can
30.
tighten it up.
Instead of your only 15.
Yeah.
Or what you think was your 15. And you're more confident on stage because, you can warm up a crowd better because you had to warm up a crowd for 30 minutes at this other place. Now
But
you're just doing it for
let's
15.
take a step back because the new person listening to this, they go, okay, so I don't even know where, like, I don't even know. Maybe they can find a restaurant with an open mic night kind of thing, a weekend gig. They've got their 15, 20 minutes. How do they make the next leap? Like, you made that leap into the comedy club pretty easily right there. But like that, how do you do that? Do you go, call the comedy club up and go, hey, I'm an out of work comic. Do you need me?
Yeah. Here's the something you got
I
to
sleep there too.
Yeah. Here's one thing you got to hear that's hard to hear,
Oh,
but
God.
it's drop
Be
dead
gentle.
honest. No comedy club thinks they need to see a new comedian walk through that door ever.
Okay.
Most of them don't.
Yeah.
They've got a list of comics that come through twice a year, if they're middle acts, once a year, if they're headliners, or however their system works. They're looking constantly for good MCs.
Sure.
And honestly, MCs that can work clean and play by the rules and just be a good setup person. Almost a better business person than a comedian sometimes.
Okay.
Somebody that can follow the rules and run the show.
Right.
That they're in desperate need of everywhere, all the time.
So that's a good.
That's how you can differentiate yourself early, is being professional, not they shouldn't have to ask you to do anything a second time.
Yeah.
First time they say it, it's done, and it'll never be done the other way again.
Okay.
Whatever that might be.
Right.
Whether it's hanging out in the green room or whatever,
Sure.
You have to be
Don't make mistakes.
on top of it.
Yeah.
Because they don't have the time to sit there and train a new person or stay on you. Occasionally you'll find a club manager or owner that just takes a liking to you.
Right.
And if you hang out long enough after the shows, they'll end up giving you a piece of advice, whether they meant to or not. But they don't think they need new people.
Right.
They realize it at some point they do, but they don't.
They need income from paying customers.
Their main 99% of clubs, 100% of clubs, their main focus is selling the alcohol,
Right.
getting 2 drinks and an appetizer or a sandwich out in 90 minutes and doing that again
Sure.
a half hour after that show's done.
Sure.
You're up there to keep those people in their chairs and have them something to look at while they're eating and drinking.
Right.
If you're funny, that's great. And if they come back to see you, that's what they want.
Right.
But they're just happy if you do your job, you don't create problems, and you're easy to work with.
So what you would come up with some sort of a kit, or would you just call these places up and say, hey, I'm a great MC.
For MCs,
My parents like me.
I hosted this thing at the Rotary Club.
Yeah.
Realistically, if the club has an open mic, you sign up to go to that open mic. But I would advise doing open mics at all the other bars and whatever in town and getting your material good.
Right.
Or great, that 5 minutes or whatever, great somewhere else besides coming into the comedy club the first time they see you and you've got all your jokes down on a piece of paper and you're reading it out loud.
Yeah.
First impressions last
That's
forever.
bad. Yeah.
Forever. Maybe the only time you get a chance so try it out at whatever place and, small open mic.
Sure.
Get it good, as good as you can.
Right.
Before you even try to come to this open mic at the comedy club.
Yeah.
Sign up, play by the rules. Some clubs will want you to bring 4 friends or 8 friends that are all paying customers. If you can't do that, it's going to be hard to work at that club.
Yeah, I have a sort of personal example of this is when I was living in DC, and 2 or 3 times a week I'd take the metro down there and go watch these comics. And finally they started letting me in for free. And I was just watching. Just absorbing basically everything I could. Eventually the club, manager there was like, hey, come out, hang back with the comedians and that kind of thing. And so I started joking around with the guy and he was like, hey, are you trying to get into comedy? I was like, yeah, I'm thinking about it. I'm nervous, blah, blah, blah. And he said, we could always let you get on, 3 or 4 minutes before the MC, comes on or whatever. And it was that moment that I realized, I feel like I should say yes, but the logical part of my brain is saying, don't do that. You could be banned forever.
Right.
Go home, do reps, and come back.
Right.
Don't just say no and say thank you, which is what I did because I went home and was scared.
Yeah. That's not uncommon.
Yeah.
If you hang out, if they see you come and support the club. While you were there, you're probably supporting them and buy a sandwich or a drink or something anyway. So, hey, this guy always spends $10 in here or whatever.
Right.
And we'll waive his ticket price on a
okay.
Tuesday night.
That's exactly
it's one more
what
warm
they did.
body. And then, so they got to know you a little bit, which is great. Not all clubs have managers that can even interact in that manner.
Yeah.
But you made yourself frequent enough that they recognized you and then talked to you.
Right.
Then you got to hang out with the comedians. And
that was great.
That's pretty rare. I'll be
Yeah.
honest with you. Not a lot of people that hang out watching the show start getting to go hang out.
Don't be weird. That's my advice for people that want to do that. Don't be weird. Just be nice. Be humble.
Yeah.
But
that's not a bad way to get into it. So you kind of backed your way into it, and then the situation
I had to back
presented
my way
itself.
out. Yeah.
Before you were really thinking about it.
Yeah.
But for most people, it's get in there, do those open mics, do consistently well, and they're going to give you more time in those. And eventually, somebody's not going to show up, and they'll need an MC, and they'll know your number.
Right. And
that's kind of...
Then they make that call.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then from that point to go to the middle act.
Actually, let's take it back one step, because all of what we just said goes for hanging out at your local club.
Right.
Because you're not driving 3 hours to hang out at some place enough for them to get to know you. Okay, so let's see how we can leverage your MC abilities at this one club
Right.
into the next before we move on to featuring.
Sure.
Okay, so you're emceeing at your local club. You get to do it, I don't know, once a month maybe.
Right.
I mean, maybe once a year, just depending on what they think
What's
of you and how
going on,
often
yeah.
they need you. But every time you work, you're working with 2 comics from out of town, usually.
Yeah.
And so in the green room, backstage, you hang out, you listen.
quiet.
You don't tell them what you think is funny. You listen. You might comment on,
Right.
I love that joke of yours, whatever. But be a good comedy buddy.
Yeah.
And eventually they'll go, hey, man, have you ever worked at where they're from? You been in Houston?
Right.
Well, yeah. Would you go to Houston? If I hooked you up with the week in Houston, would you come down there?
Right.
And they'd probably put in a word for it.
Okay.
Now, that word may not get you the booking, but now your name is on the front of mind of the manager at the club. And if you
Okay.
did shoot him an email, or honestly, if you made it, well, it's different everywhere you go. If you're able to connect with the guy and get on his good side, you might get a showcase before you would get the MC week at that club, probably.
Right, okay.
He'd still want to see or maybe check out some clips online. You never
Just
see
because it's a more professional position almost to do the MC, it's a little harder because there's so much business
right
to do
And plus, he's got 30 local comics trying to get an MC spot there.
as well. Yeah.
And another thing, a lot of clubs will only book local MCs because they don't want to have to spend money on a hotel room
Sure.
for an out-of-town beginner.
Right.
So you got to figure all that out a
Yeah.
little bit. But I'll say this: you never want to shoot an email to a club manager you've never met and include your link to your video
a cold
and who you've worked with.
contact,
And,
yeah.
I've done open mics. It's they don't. They're wondering how'd you get
Right.
my email. You need to know them before you can do anything.
Okay.
So if you were trying to connect with the one you didn't know and you just had no connection, you haven't worked with a comic from that town, but you say you've got relatives in whatever city, and you'd love to do a show there.
Sure.
You, in desperation, you may send them an email, but you wouldn't send them links or anything. You would just say, hey, I'm
I'm
a
gonna be
comic
in
from
town.
Nashville.
Yeah.
I'm going to be in town. I would love to do a spot. If you are willing to look at a clip online, let me know and I'll shoot one back to
Yeah.
you. But you would not
I
include
have a
all that
terminal
stuff up front.
disease.
Right.
Please let me do this.
One
as
of my
last
Make-A-Wish
wish.
requests
Yeah.
is to die on stage in Kansas City.
Yeah.
So,
Will you let me do this for
Right.
$400? Yeah.
but it's amazing how quickly aspiring comics overstep boundaries
all the time.
all the time, and that's all it takes for you to be on their list of no forever. And
Oh,
you'll
dear.
never know it.
See, that's what I was always afraid of as a child, but the permanent record.
Yeah,
I
this is
didn't
going
want,
down.
Yeah,
on
this is
your
going down permanent record. That's what I.
That's it.
Definitely didn't want. Let's see. I guess maybe the next question is kind of taking that next step in how do you. It feels like the club owners want to know that you can bring an audience, you can bring a local audience or whatever into the club to create revenue. So how do you build that audience? What do you do? I mean,
Right. Well, that's key. And now it's very easy for them to look at your YouTube clip and how many followers you have on Facebook or Twitter.
Right.
And if it's outlandish numbers, they're a little more curious than if
Okay.
you got 6 friends and they're all family, right?
Sure.
So, but as an MC or even a feature act, they're not expecting you to bring anybody in. They really aren't. It's a great bonus and it's a huge benefit if you do that. But when
They're
you-
hoping the headliner brings everyone.
that's what the name means.
Okay.
I'm on the marquee. I'm the headliner. People know me. They're coming to see me.
Okay.
Now, there's 2 kinds of headliners. There's name headliners that we all know, and there's guys that can do the job that aren't famous.
Right.
And they're both competent.
Okay.
But the name headliners will sell more tickets.
Sure.
And
Higher ticket price.
And
or-
they need the club less. The no-name headliners need the club more because the club's selling the tickets for them.
Right. Gotcha.
So that's leverage. And so
Okay.
supply and demand with the comedy, the more unique you can be and bring in customers who wouldn't come to the comedy club anyway.
Right.
That's a huge benefit.
Okay.
But it's not expected of you in the first stages.
Yeah.
It's just, in fact, in the first stages, if you're emceeing and 100 people show up just to see you, they're not even going to take the response from the crowd at face value because it's all your buddies. So
Right.
it's not expected. But as you move up the chain, you can be a non-famous, no-name headliner at some clubs for a while. But after a few times too, if you're not bringing some people in, they're going to move you down the list of people they want to have come through.
Sure. And maybe as kind of a last question, what does it take? Maybe paint a picture of hopefully this isn't too high of an income, but replacing let's say a $50,000 regular income from a job or something, replacing that with what does that look like in the comedy world?
In the comedy world,
Does that mean you're hosting, Letterman or something?
in the comedy world, Well, I'll just run through the 3 levels.
Okay.
Ballpark, and once again, everything changes.
Yeah.
But say if you're getting $300 to MC at a club, when you feature, they're probably going to give you 6.
Okay.
And when you headline, they're going to give you like 12. It kind of doubles, roughly. Sometimes it's a
12
bigger,
for the what week?
$1,200 for the week.
A week. Okay.
Okay. Now, at some clubs, you do more shows, bigger clientele. It could be a lot higher than that. But if you're a no-name headliner, they have more leverage on you.
Yes. Okay.
And so if you're a no-name, any break you get, you're going to take.
Yeah.
And so you're more likely to take the lower paying.
Yeah, I'm taking this a
headlining.
little personally with the if you're a no name.
Well, I'm a no-name headliner.
Yeah, it's
when I headlined to clubs, I was
Right.
a no-name. In some pockets of the country, I had a little bit of a following.
okay.
But I was at the time where you didn't have any social media to keep track of all
To
those
market,
people.
basically,
I had
yeah.
an email list, and that was people changing jobs. It was hard
Sure.
for me to keep track of. But there were comics in my position that did a better job of keeping track of those people.
Okay.
And they did build a following.
Okay.
All right. So I use that term endearingly. Like
Yeah,
the people that I think are the funniest in the world are mostly no-name headliners.
just because they're working.
They're working and they got it down.
Yeah.
And every job is important.
Yeah.
And so they perform on top of their ability.
Okay.
They may not have that big break or their age past the limit to where they're looking for them. There's a lot of different
Okay.
things that
Sure.
happen.
Yeah.
Or honestly, for me, I never aspired to be on a TV show. Or I know I can't act. I know I can't
Right.
memorize lines. And
Don't get down on yourself.
No.
You know what I'm saying?
Lucky for
This
me,
is a
I figured that
podcast
out
of hope
earlier.
right now.
But I've done some TV things.
Yeah.
But I visited LA a couple times early.
Yeah.
And I hated the vibe of it.
Sure.
New York a couple times. I'm a farm kid.
Right.
I couldn't imagine having to hear honking horns and try to fall asleep.
Yeah.
Maybe a cowbell or something
Sure.
like that. But of all the places that I looked at, Chicago seemed to be a good fit because
Okay.
it's Midwest, but it's city.
Right.
So I could see it, but that's not where TV shows are made unless
Sure.
you're Oprah, right?
Yeah.
So, but it was never a goal of mine to be on TV, and I even would do auditions for some of these showcases, comedy festivals. And I would do a set, and the guy would talk to me like, "Man, that's a good set.
Right.
What are your goals in comedy?" And I would tell him, and none of them included doing TV shows.
Yeah. Feed my family.
Yeah.
Pay the car payment.
Yeah, so this is what I enjoy doing. I've got different things around.
Right.
And so they would always look at me and go, "Why'd you do the audition?" I said, "I just want to see where I stack up with other guys."
Yeah.
But I wasn't going to give up everything. It just wasn't my goal.
Right.
I come from my background. It's just, but some of these, I guess what I'm trying to dial it back to is it's okay. Your goals have to be yours. You can't let somebody else's goals, whether it's the comedy community, other comedians, agents, whatever, define your success.
Right.
And I think that's true of any occupation anywhere.
Sure.
But if you don't know what your goals are and you don't move towards them, all that stuff will affect you and you think less of what you're doing.
Okay.
If you have goals that are a stretch but attainable with hard work and you keep moving towards what you want to do, that's totally great. I mean,
Okay.
you have to be
As
happy.
long as you're, yeah.
Let me tell you, comedy is 99% about making the crowd happy.
Right.
You got to go home with some knowledge of what makes you happy.
Right.
And so if you don't have that, you're wanting the crowd to justify your existence.
Yeah.
I mean, lots of
fickle
comedians,
beast. Yeah.
self-destructive people.
Yeah.
Whether it's with drinking, drugs, or there's many comedy suicides, right?
Yeah.
Because they haven't found what makes their life important to them.
Right.
And that could be a lot of different things with a lot of different people. But as you move through the comedy thing, you should have some metrics that are external that you can judge like that, and some internal that you
Right.
can judge to keep a balance.
Okay.
And that's just to be as healthy of a comedian as you can.
Yeah. So the different comedians, that like if your goal is to maybe do some writing on a TV series or something, that income and stuff may come from there. But if
Sure.
that's not your goal, it may come from, like you said, headlining, 52, weeks out of the year,
Right.
doing something like that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different things we could talk about at this juncture too. But I guess I'll just say early on, the goal should be to get good and get better, and all the other stuff will come with it.
Okay. But keep an eye on it.
But keep an eye on it, and we'll do an entire podcast sometime down the road of the metrics that I use.
Okay.
And I didn't even know that was the word for it until
Yeah.
my accountant said,
I don't know what that word means.
he's like-
I know the Matrix.
Yeah.
I don't know.
metrics are milestones and landmarks each year that you, like for this year, one metric I have
Yeah.
is bookings with new clients, people I've never worked for before.
Right.
All right. And I'm in pretty much the corporate comedy environment.
Okay.
So I want to increase the number of new clients that I have. I have some return clients that I do shows for every couple of years or what
Right.
have you. But I have a certain number that I want to hit each year where I'm
Okay.
developing new business.
Yeah.
And I also at this stage never want to be single income dependent.
Yeah.
All right. And when you first start comedy, hopefully you've got another job to support you for a while, but there'll be that jumping off point where just working at the clubs is the only income you have.
Yeah.
It's a very
That's
dangerous
scary.
place to be, right?
I feel scary in my soul.
Well, just think about all the things that you would do in that situation you wouldn't do normally.
Yeah.
All right. So one tip I would give you as an aspiring comedian is to build up some cash
Yeah.
so that you don't make bad decisions when you jump full steam into comedy.
Sure.
It sounds smart to say take every gig that's offered to you. Occasionally, there's a couple that are not the right fit for a lot of different reasons.
Okay.
You may not know that until you try it, and sometimes you got to take those.
Hindsight.
But being able to say, I don't have to drive 500 miles to Topeka for a one-nighter to hopefully get back with some money to pay,
Now, Topeka is a lovely town as long as you're leaving it.
Right. Well, the show's at nighttime, so if you pull in right at...
Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying is, you don't... Comedy is in a way, it's a desperate profession. You don't want all of your situations in your life to be desperate at the same time.
Right.
Your money situation should not be desperate. Your relationship should not be desperate.
Yeah.
You want some of those things to be stable.
Yeah.
So that when you come back from this crazy world, there's some comfort.
Stability.
And you can regroup.
Okay.
If everything around you is chaos, I don't know where you go to get stable.
Yeah.
Right? So having some backlog of money is a way to do that. But really quickly, back to the metrics thing to wrap it up. Each year I look at different things to see if I've progressed financially or client-wise or goal-wise.
Okay.
And I tweak those up every year.
Gotcha.
And the ones that don't pay off, I cut out.
Okay.
Like I say, we'll do a whole podcast on this. And when we do, make sure you ask me about what I call my gig index.
Okay.
And I would actually rate the clubs on their value to me as opposed to my value to them.
Sure. Okay.
And I had 10 marks, and they could get 10 out of 10 or 0 out of 10 for each of those things.
Okay.
And the clubs that served me the best, I went back to, and I trimmed out the bottom 20% every year.
Okay.
So used the Pareto principle on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's a lot of things you can do to kind of see. No, if you don't have these things, you never know if you're doing better. You're only going on your feelings.
Right.
But to look at hard facts.
My feelings swing quite a lot.
Yeah.
So
So these things will bring you back. And sometimes you're in a bad mood after a show. I'm having a good year.
Yeah.
I had a bad night.
I was in a bad mood earlier, and I feel like this has helped me a little bit.
It's a long run.
So, yeah.
You got to stop and pace
Absolutely.
yourself.
Well, again, thank you for answering some of our questions, and can't wait till next time.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed that. Still a lot of valid advice in there. There's nothing I'm going to override at this point. Things changed slightly, but not so far off that I would change any of those 12 tips that I gave back in the time. Great to hear Gavin Miller again. If you guys were with us from the beginning, hopefully this was a nice blast from the past. And depending on how this episode is received, we might go back in the vault from time to time and pull out some previous episodes because, as you heard in that one, still lots of information that why repeat it if it was put down once? That's what I say. All right, we've got a lightning storm moving in here in Nashville. Hot. Maybe this is going to be a cool front. I'm not sure, but I'm going to get off the mic before the mic shocks me. All right, take care. Stay safe out there, everybody, and stay funny.
Thanks for listening to the School of Laughs podcast. If you'd like to hear more School of Laughs podcasts, you can find them on iTunes and Stitcher.com. And don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. For information on upcoming live and online classes, visit schooloflaughs.com. Until next time, stay tuned, stay focused, and stay funny.